Hello, I'm just going to go through some of the common mistakes that you make when you're making your comparisons that I saw in some of your answers. Let's go. Now, let's look at example number 1. Okay, this student started with from source C. The Chinese people would have seen the heads of thieves being displayed in public. What's the problem here? The problem here is where is your ADQ? So the ADQ answer the question is missing. You did not write the word different in the first line, right? And you did not give me the CC, the common criteria, in the first line as well. So these two things are actually missing, and therefore before I even read the first line, I already mark it down. You're going down to level 2 because you do not have your common criteria in the first line itself, and you also did not answer the question in the first line. Are they different? Are you writing difference? Are you writing similarity? Alright, so don't do this. From source C, the Chinese people and people who have seen the heads of these being displayed would fear the Japanese because of their strict and cruel ways. The Chinese from source C would had the least benefit from the Japanese, as the Chinese treated unfairly, while in source D the Indians were given benefits. They were given a chance to promote the Japanese culture. Again, also, where is your evidence? Where is your quoted evidence? Right, it's also missing here. So I don't see the criteria, I don't see the ATQ, I don't see the quoted evidence. Right, although you have somewhat picked out the difference here, but it's not phrased correctly. Okay, so bear in mind, make sure you ATQ at the start, make sure you write different or similar at the start, make sure you give me the common criteria first at the start, then you give me both inferences at the start. Now let's look at another example here. The sources are different. Okay, good. You have ATQ over here, you have wrote they are different as source A states, but then here, right, did not quote evidence here. First mistake, you didn't quote the evidence. Second mistake, this part here, where is my CC? Where's my common criteria? Right, you cannot jump immediately to saying what each sources states without first giving my common criteria and my contrasting inferences. Okay, so this one again will fall down to L22, or even worse, it will fall down to L11 because my criteria here is missing. My contrasting inference is missing as well. You jump straight into giving me the evidence. So there's no basis for this evidence. I don't know what to look out for. Therefore, this is a L11, L22 type of answer. Please avoid it. Let's look at example number 3 now. Okay, you have ATQ, yes, both are different. Okay, good, you have ATQ here. In terms of the Japanese targeting the Chinese, which was the result of them having the most hatred towards them. Now, when you write your difference, right, the line after your difference should just be your criteria, common criteria. Okay, you should not give me inferences yet. Just give me the common criteria first before you give me the inference in the second line. Okay, in this case, you have given me the inferences in the first line, and the common criteria is also not that clear because it's kind of running on sentence, right? The Japanese targeted the Chinese. Okay, so are they different in terms of Japanese targeting the Chinese? But then in the next line you say it was the result of them having the most hatred. So it's not clear what exactly is your topic. Is it the Japanese targeting the Chinese? Is this your topic? Or is it that it was the most hatred towards them? And what is the difference in the inferences between the two? Right? Because here you're stating an inference. So how can it be different when you only give me one inference here, that the Japanese were targeting the Chinese because of hatred? Right? So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't conclude about a difference. Alright, so don't give me the inference in the first line. Give me the common criteria first, then give me your difference in the inferences based on this same common criteria. So in source C, those who were caught stealing had to face punishment. the Japanese did not have bias on who they executed. So how exactly does this line here relate to the line you wrote in front? Again, everything must be based on the first line that you wrote. So in D, the Japanese, don't write this, I write the full insults. D, the Japanese hated the Chinese. Okay. In conclusion, so where's my evidence? Where's my evidence? Where's my explanation? Again, it's gone. So the format for this is totally wrong. In conclusion, the difference is that the Japanese targeted the Chinese, which was the result of everybody's hatred towards them, but everybody faced equal consequences. So targeting the Chinese versus equal consequences, right? It's somewhat there, but it's not clear, alright? And in the first place, this line should be in front here. So therefore, there's a lot of problems with this paragraph, alright, in not following a criteria, not being clear in what you are stating. Alright, let's move on to the next example. Two more examples. Here, both sources are different. Thank you very much. You have answered the question in terms of how harsh the Japanese rule was. Thank you very much. You have given me the criteria, the CCR common criteria. You're talking about whether or not they were exactly harsh, right? But then, after that, right, you must give me the inferences first. Give me the inference, right? C tells me in terms of harshness they were harsh, while D tells me in terms of harshness they were more kind-hearted, more caring towards the people. Instead of jumping straight to listing the evidence, right, give me the two inferences first before you jump to your evidence. Anyway, moving on. Let's look at this evidence. When 4 people were caught stealing, their heads were chopped off and they were displayed in public. This implies Japanese rule was harsh. Okay, I will accept this. This is valid. But then again, you're just lifting in your explanation. So you shouldn't do this because you already say harsh here. You already mentioned harsh over here. So you're just repeating yourself. That's not a good explanation. And then let's look at the next one. Okay, source D states students have to learn Japanese language, face direction, and sing the anthem. This implies that it was less harsh. Now, can you see the problem here? Learning the language, facing the direction, and singing the anthem is not even mentioning about any form of treatment that the Japanese have towards the people. Okay, this is the policies that they make the people do. You have to learn the language, you have to face the direction, and sing the anthem. But is it speaking about how you're being treated? Not really, right? So it's quite far-fetched to say that this evidence implies that they were less harsh. Alright, so this is called my evidence plus explanation mismatch. So be very careful. The difference on the similarity will be very obvious. Alright, if you have to go and make a very vague mismatch like this by saying that because you learn Japanese, hence you're less harsh, okay, the link is not quite strong, and therefore because the link in D is not quite strong, this criteria here will not be valid. Okay, because you cannot say that one is harsh because when they caught stealing their heads were chopped off, the other one not so harsh because they learn Japanese language. So it doesn't really make sense, and therefore this is called an invalid CC. So you have to look for a more obvious one. Last example, okay, both sources are different. Thank you very much. You have answered the question. How the Japanese treated look. Again, the same thing. This one is not implied very strongly in D. Okay, so D, it says Japanese wanted to learn, remove the Western influence, Japanese to influence the minds of the people. This means that the Japanese cared for the locals. Alright, it's not so much that they cared, but they are forcing the locals to learn it, right? So you cannot say that because you learn Japanese, you remove Western influence and promote Japanese culture, this implies that you care, right? Again, this is quite subjective to what exactly is care, what exactly is well educated. So again, the evidence plus explanation is a mismatch. All right, it's too far-fetched to base on this explanation, to have this explanation based on this evidence. So therefore, this one is also invalid. I will also call this your invalid CC. So check carefully. Are your evidence and explanation having a strong mismatch? Okay. And likewise, after you give me the CC here, right, where is my contrasting inference? Right, my contrasting inference is missing again. So now, let's look at the example one more time to explain what am I talking about. Okay, let's see. C and D are different. Your ATQ, right, are different, right, in terms of what? The methods they use to control the people. Alright, this is my criteria. Okay, after that, my inferences from my criteria. What is exactly is the difference in the methods? Well, C says they use fear, while D states that they use propaganda. So I'm very clear. I'm talking about these methods to control. I'm clearly stating what each of the sources tell me about this method, which is one is about fear, the other one is about propaganda, to ensure the people remain loyal. Then I move on to my evidence from C. How I know that C is fear? Because it says anyone who was seen as a threat would be tortured and military police were common, implying that they use fear indeed to get people to submit. So I explain, right? Explain by providing my causal links: fear, afraid, punishment, receive. Okay? So my causal links are very strong here in my explanation. Then I move on to my evidence of D. D meanwhile says the Japanese wanted to remove Western influence to promote culture, influence the minds of the people, have to learn Japanese. So going back to here, this is also about the method used to control. So now it's no longer fear, right? This means that the method, again, causal links, Japanese use propaganda to educate about culture so that they will remain loyal, and once they are loyal, you will have their control, right? You will have the control of the people. So therefore, I'm very clear here. My criteria is about the control of the people. My difference is that one is about fear, one is about propaganda. I've written this clearly in my second line. Then I've given evidence explanation clearly in my following line to complete my paragraph. Alright, so take a look at this again. The notes are inside the Notion. Take a look again. Alright, and see how you can write a proper difference, proper similarity paragraph. Just a quick one again about the similarity. Again, ATQ, similar. Then give me the common criteria plus your common inferences because they are the same, right? The locals assisted one another. This is about relationship. They assisted one another so that they can avoid being persecuted. Then evidence C. How I know that they help one another? Well, the man who collects waste would not reveal who's the culprit, right? And then similarly in D, it also says that my mother gave her sari to a Chinese woman to disguise as an Indian. This both implies they were willing to help prevent one another from being ill-treated from the Japanese, and therefore it links back to my common criteria and common inferences that in terms of the relationship of the people, they cared for one another. It was one of care. It was one where they assisted one another to avoid being persecuted by the Japanese. Alright, so I hope that this video is useful for you to understand how exactly to write a proper comparison question.